Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us again. I'm Phil Doherty, and this is the Code Authority, the new podcast from UL Solutions. It's just one more way that we are working for a safer world. This is the show where we talk about some of the top minds in fire safety. Rather, we'll be talking about fire safety, electrical safety, security, standards development, and a whole lot more. Joining us today are Ken Boyce, Vice President, Principal Engineering of TIC Industrial, Dwayne Sloan, Director, Principal Engineering, Built Environments, and Chris James, Manager, Principal Engineering, Built Environment. These guys are some of the key players in the technical leadership here at UL Solutions. So, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us here today. Today, we're going to be talking about the UL councils. And to get a better idea of the scope of the councils, first, for all of our listeners and viewers, let's look at some of our company's history. Because not everyone, first of all, is familiar with some of the name changes that we've undergone over the past couple of years. We are over 130 years old here as a company, of course. And for most of that time, we've been one company that was called Underwriters Laboratories, or UL. And AHJs, contractors, civic officials, they all still commonly call us UL. But we then evolved into three separate companies. UL Research Institute, that's a blue logo. People may have seen it. It's a not-for-profit. UL Standards and Engagement, it's a green logo, also not-for-profit. And then, of course, UL Solutions with the red logo. We are publicly traded, for-profit, and that is where all of us are from as well right now. Separate companies, like I said, but there are plenty of places where we still work in concert, including the UL councils. So the councils have helped drive innovation into the marketplace for over a century, and three of the council chairs are here, and each of our guests is one of them. So first of all, I'd like to start with Ken Boyce, who is the chair of the Electrical Council. Ken, can you give us a little history about the councils in general?
Great. Sure. Thank you, Phil. It's really a pleasure to be here speaking with everybody. The UL councils are a really important part of our broader system that advances the UL mission and working for a safer world. All the way back in 1910, UL's Board of Trustees created one single council, simply called the Council of Underwriters Laboratories. And the goal of that was to hear from safety experts about real world issues that needed to be addressed and then to advise us on how we can best accomplish that. And this council was made up of three engineering sections of the company at the time that quickly spun off to become their own individual councils, the Electrical Council, Fire Council, and the Casualty Council. And then shortly thereafter, we established the Security Council that we'll hear more about from Chris later. Since that time, a lot has changed, but one thing certainly has not. Our interest in collaborating with regulatory officials and safety leaders to help keep the world safe and secure. The UL Enterprise, UL Solutions, UL Standards and Engagement, and UL Research Institutes all prioritize our engagement with the councils to drive our scientific research, development of new requirements, key initiatives, and safety certifications. And I'm very honored to lead the UL Solutions technical team that serves in the council leadership roles because this work is really so important.
So, who are some of the members that are on these councils? Who makes them up, and what sort of roles do they play?
Yeah, great question. The councils really play a critical role in identifying those real world challenges that we can solve together, and they provide us with invaluable feedback in developing practical solutions. And these are leaders in their fields, very enthusiastic supporters of the UL enterprise and our mission. These council members are really important experts and influencers in the safety and security communities. They're government officials, regulators, authorities having jurisdiction, and thought leaders in their respective areas of practice. And they provide us with their expertise, guidance, and perspective about these practical safety and security challenges, code and installation issues, requirements for new and emerging technologies, and other emerging issues in the safety and security world. Together, we consider the best ways to collectively address these issues and promote safe living and working environments. And our longstanding role as a convener, coupled with the applied technical expertise of our council members and our staff, really continues to drive meaningful change.
Okay, so could you tell me a little bit about the Electrical Council specifically and how it has influenced the UL enterprise as a whole?
Yeah, gladly. The Electrical Council has been focused on the safety of the electrical infrastructure since 1913. It's comprised of amazing, dedicated experts from the AHJ community, the electrical trades, government agencies, energy experts, and other thought leaders that really know their stuff in the world of electrical safety. We've been highly active in supporting responsible deployment of new electrical technologies and to drive coordination of new product safety and code requirements so that they work together in concert. This certainly includes a massive amount of work related to technologies like renewable energy, energy storage systems, electric vehicle charging, grid modernization, and the IoT or Internet of Everything for the power domain. We've spent significant effort also to identify and proactively address cross-cutting issues like circuit protection, interoperability, functional safety, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, and other broadly impactful technological evolutions. And we know that innovation continues to happen at an incredibly rapid pace. The Electrical Council works together to help promote safe, responsible innovation in the electrical domain while understanding the new vulnerabilities that might emerge with those innovations and coordinating the product and code requirements. And increasingly, for topics like battery energy storage and cybersecurity, we find that the issues that we're working on also have implications for the fire and security councils. So we've had some great multilateral efforts in bringing those different perspectives together to really forge a holistic solution.
So this is really technical stuff here, and I do find it pretty fascinating. But when you get together for a meeting with all of these specialists, first of all, how do you determine what you're going to talk about? Does everyone just come up with like a list of, hey, this seemed pretty unsafe, or hey, some of our stakeholders have been complaining about this, and you talk about it? Or like, how do you determine the agenda? Because this is really important stuff about all kinds of stuff, not to put too fine a point on it. How do you determine what you're going to talk about? How does it rise up to the top of the pile for discussion?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. So we definitely ask our council members, what do you want to talk about while we're together? What are the things that are presenting challenges for you? What are the things you're concerned about that maybe need to be more holistically addressed? And we collect some really great ideas from them. And that's important for us because we really want to listen to them, right? It's so important in these council meetings to listen to what's going on and what their experiences are. And not surprisingly, we find that a lot of these topics come up multiple times. So then that clearly is going to rise to the list of top of the list of priorities. We also have topics that we've identified, things that we're working on, maybe new and innovative products, where we know that there might be some code implications where the code may not perhaps be ready for this particular type of product, and we want to make sure we're thinking about what the right path to market deployment would look like. We have some of these ideas for emerging technologies and things that we know are under development, and they really need to be factored into an architecture of safety so it all works together the right way. We can test the products and certify them. The HJs can see what's going on and really understand what's happening and apply the code requirements to them and keep their community safe.
In the past, I don't know, year or so, maybe 5 years, something like that, is there a particular area of risk that you've addressed that you would consider to be a big win? Something that, a couple years ago you thought, this is a very big emerging issue. We don't know how to tackle it yet. And then through the work of the electrical council, you then came to a conclusion or a result in the form of a standard or a code that you feel confident did a good job of addressing that need. Is it like a particular one that you're proud of?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say electric vehicle charging has really evolved very rapidly, and people want their electric vehicles to charge as quickly as possible, and so there's been a lot of technological innovation there, and making sure that we're coordinating that interface with the vehicle, and we're also coordinating the interface with the power system and the grid is really complex. We're seeing the emergence of more sophisticated software-driven tools, cloud-based applications that make sure all these things happen the right way. And so the electrical council's been really hugely influential in us making sure we address that the right way. There's also one other wrinkle is vehicle power export. So an electric vehicle serving as a source of power, almost like a drivable portable generator. And how does that interface safely with the premises wiring system? These are really important topics, and they're happening incredibly quickly. And the council's been tremendously important in that. An area we're still working on, but we've had some great sessions in our last meetings is on how artificial intelligence is being embedded into products to provide protective features, and then also kind of in this cloud-based ecosystem to drive a more systems of systems approach to safety and making sure we have the right handshakes and the right protection across that entire system and all the possible modes of operation and foreseeable misuse or unpredictable conditions is important. So those are areas that we've been spending a lot of time on, and we know that set of topics will continue to be relevant in the safety community going forward.
Absolutely. It definitely sounds like many of those topics are things that, the rest of us see in the news every day. Those are very big things that affect just about everybody. Thank you very much. Moving on now to the Fire Council section. We're going to talk to our own Dwayne Sloan. Dwayne is the chair of the Fire Council. So, Dwayne, what can you tell us about the Fire Council? Who is on it? And really, largely, what does it do?
Right. Awesome. Yeah, really appreciate that, Phil. Similar to the Electrical Council, the Fire Council dates back to 1913 as well, with a strong history spanning over 110 years. The Fire Council provides guidance on things such as fire suppression systems, fire suppression equipment, fire resistant building design and building materials, flame and smoke characteristics of building materials. Our members are made up similar of fire and building code officials, fire academic experts, federal agencies, fire service members like first responders, independent fire safety experts, and the insurance industry representatives. And again, their work and their experience, they exemplify some of the highest levels of professional competence in their own fields of study. And so we're really pleased to have them on our council. And as Ken said, it's very collaborative, and we end up talking about a lot of the key challenges that face our societies today.
That's a lot of distinguished disciplines right there. Just out of curiosity, how does somebody get invited to serve on one of the councils? Is it like a formal selection process?
Great
Do they just
question.
send an email? I mean,
Right, exactly. Yeah, so we do have a fire council membership committee, a subset of our council that convenes, and we talk about things such as membership. We talk about those that might be good candidates, and we have a roster of those that are good candidates to invite to be members of our esteemed committee. And then our fire council membership committee, we do have meetings where we have an opportunity to look at their credentials and vote on them, and then they give their guidance to the fire council membership. So for the most part, it is based upon those that we know are in their fields of study that could actually really help us work through some of these daunting challenges.
sounds kind of like a pro ball draft right there almost. You're looking like you're up and comers in the fields deciding who you want to invite to sit on the council. It's interesting. Okay, well, this one segues in pretty well then. For all the people who are participating in the councils, do they get paid for their work?
Actually, they don't. Yeah, basically, these members consider it a really high honor to serve with us and to be such a part of UL's overall safety mission. They serve without compensation. We do expect them to adhere to certain standards of conduct and that includes acting in the public interest. We expect them to avoid any conflicts of interest, as you can imagine, that they might have. And another thing is that the things that we talk about in the council meetings, they are considered to be confidential. They're not necessarily asked to be a true representative of the UL enterprise unless the council is asking them, requesting them to do so.
Okay. Could you tell us a little bit about how the Fire Council has influenced the recent work of UL Solutions and the UL enterprise as a whole? What are some of your wins recently?
Okay, sure, absolutely. I would say over the past decade or so, we've had some really key wins. One that comes to mind is how we reacted to the changing living environment. If you look at the living environment, whether it's an office or your homes, and look at the combustible products that are in the living environment today compared to 20 or 30 years ago, then you can imagine that that changing environment is full of combustible materials, materials that burn more intense and have faster fires. Well, if you have more faster fires and more intense fires, then we had to react to that so that we can get people out of their homes and out of their living environments safely. And one of the things that arose out of that was the focus on smoke alarms and smoke detectors. So once we understood the smoke characterization and that changing living environment, that allowed us to focus on smoke alarms and smoke detectors and make some really significant changes to the safety standards with regards to smoke alarms and smoke detectors. And so that was a huge win for us. Another win that we have that's a little bit more recent was focusing on exterior cladding. Many on that looking at the podcast may remember the Grenfell Tower fire. So these types of fires on exterior of buildings was happening all over the globe. And the council did some deep dives, some really good, rich conversations about those requirements, the test standards, and how we were going to move the needle on safety with regards to exterior wall cladding. And one other area that comes to mind is focusing on something called emergency radio communication enhancement systems. That's a mouthful. But basically, there were lacking requirements on that, and we wanted to go in and create requirements for these communication enhancement systems that would be better for our first responders when they're on the fire ground.
By the way, plug for another episode. Chris Creamer, also of UL Solutions, has done an entire episode on those ERC systems as well. So you're going to want to be sure to check out our YouTube channel for that one and look up that particular episode, because that is another fascinating topic that most of us completely take for granted. We don't even think about until what happens when a firefighter or emergency responder has to communicate through, 3 feet of concrete and steel, and the radio signal won't get through there. So that's another fascinating topic. All right, we regularly have the convening of the council's meeting conference where all the council members get together. The most recent one that we had was back in November and touched on many topics there as well that are very relevant. What were some of those that you discussed, and what were some of the outcomes of those discussions?
Great. Well, just as Ken mentioned, we get together and we have a lot of topics and probably many more than we could discuss in the time that we have together. But we choose those high priority topics to speak about. At November's convening of the council, we talked about, once again, artificial intelligence and how those smart systems were impacting fire protection and safety systems. We also talked a little bit about the balance between sustainable construction and the focus on sustainable construction, but that balance where those sustainable materials and designs still have to be fire testing compliant and also have to meet certain fire standards. We also focused on consumer firefighting products such as aerosol firefighting products and fire blankets and fireballs. And of course, we could not convene without talking about urban conflagrations. That's a fancy word for where wildfires kind of meet the wildland urban interface and then work their way into the cities. And then you have building to building fires, as you have seen in situations around the world. And so we had a chance to talk about some of the work happening for urban conflagrations as well.
Very fascinating conversations there. If you had to pinpoint one thing that gives the most value from the councils, what would that be?
Yeah, that's a tough one, but if I had to pinpoint one thing, I would say it's the real world experience that the council members bring. I mean, we have staff that are great expertise in the technical standards and how to apply the standards. We have expertise in the codes, but sometimes what we really need is a community of practice out there that can apply real world scenarios and how those standards and codes would apply to the real world. So I would say the one thing is that having that voice of practical experience from the field really helps to guide us on where we want to be with our standard setting, our standards development, our code development, as well as the services that we have from UL Solutions.
So we got classroom smarts and street smarts here. These councils is what it sounds like.
That's right.
Interesting. All right. Thank you very much, Dwayne. And we have one more council to talk about now. That would be the Security Council, and our own Chris James is here to tell us a little bit more about that. Chris, what can you tell us about the UL Security Council?
Well, thank you very much for that question, Phil. And although the Security Council is just a little bit younger than the electrical and the fire councils, we are still very old at being young. We're over 100 years of history. And in addition to the electrical and fire council being formed in 1910 and 1913, respectively, the Security Council was formed in 1921. So, although a little bit younger than the other two, but still over 100 years of history. So, in general, what is the primary purpose of the Security Council? Well, the primary focus is very similar to what those of our the Fire and Electrical Council, but where we veer off a little bit is we really start getting into more of the physical security pieces. And what do we mean by physical security? We mean bullet resistant materials, burglary resistant locks, safes and vaults. We also get into property protection products. And what does that mean? That means access control systems, commercial alarm control units, and intrusion device equipment. So, and then recently we've also added cybersecurity. So that's a very young area within our security council that we're really starting to try to grow into. So regarding who are on our council, it varies, very similar to what are in the other two councils. It may vary a little bit based on the specific industries involved, but we really focus on having representation from the insurance industries, the law enforcement area, corporate security, government agencies, and academia. And we're currently in the process of trying to grow the council representation regarding cybersecurity, since this is a new area and we really want to make sure that that is a area that we continue to grow in within UL Solutions.
I got to say, some of the security testing that I've seen the scientists and engineers do here is actually pretty neat to see. You guys are going to have to check out some of the videos that we have on YouTube and elsewhere. One that our crew did recently, like in the past year, it was for testing bullet resistant materials. I think it was glass, and it looked like it was a 50 caliber shell. They took it in the lab and fired it. And first of all, that's just amazing to see. Off the top of your head, do you happen to know what the largest caliber round we've ever tested is? Is it just small arms ammunition? Are we doing anything bigger? I'm just curious as to how we test that. What's the biggest we've done?
You know, I believe we're at 50 caliber is in the highest range at this point. Now, granted, the caliber may not always represent the most penetration of a weapon, but I think right now the highest caliber is a 50 caliber.
Okay. I thought that was really neat when I saw it, and you guys are gonna have to check that out, like, online. Like, when I say you guys, I'm talking about everybody else who's gonna be watching this, because I'm sure that you guys have already seen it. But yeah, it's great stuff. What kinds of things are council members asked to do? Like, when you actually show up in a meeting, what is the security council specifically? What are they asked to do?
Well, as Kenan stated earlier, really the primary purpose of the UL councils are as acting as an active and critical part of our broader system that advances the UL mission of safety, which is working for a safer world. With that being said, it's still very important that we expect a certain level of participation from our council members. You know, some of these expectations are we expect them to be submitting council agendas and also delivering and presenting these types of topics. So it's one thing to simply submit topics, but we want these individuals to also be actively engaged in the discussion and the presentation of these topics. We're also looking for individuals to provide feedback and be engaged in the discussion. In many of these situations, there may be breakout groups, there may be groups or discussions within the actual council themselves, and we want people to be actively engaged. We also want them to be present during the meeting. So it's one thing to say you are a council member. That's another thing to say you're participating in an active council member. So either by means of in person or when we do teleconferences, we're always wanting people to be present during those meetings. And when possible, we want them to be actively participating in standards and engagement technical committees, as well as any other codes and standards committees. We want them to be actively engaged in the ability to change standards in regards to our mission and safety. And then finally, we really want them to be an ambassador for safety and also, again, continue to exhibit the UL mission for working for a safer world.
All right. And finally here, are there any particular projects that the councils have had that have overlapped where you guys in your respective councils have ended up working together, pulling your knowledge and resources for a particular end? Or are you pretty well separate in what you're working on?
Yeah, we've definitely had some multilateral activity. So security and electrical have spent a lot of time thinking about what cybersecurity looks like for the electrical infrastructure, especially as we see more distributed energy resources like rooftop solar and wind turbines and EV charging systems, energy storage systems being deployed. The attack vectors could look quite different for those, and so that was a topic of mutual interest for both of those councils. I know on the electrical and fire side, we spent quite a bit of time talking about energy storage systems, which are really important for our energy future, but we have to make sure they're safe. And what does that mean when a fire engages an energy storage system that has this kind of dramatic capacity to escalate very quickly from a small event to a very large scale, potentially catastrophic event? And we've spent some really important time talking about that together. So we're getting the electrical infrastructure experts' view. We're hearing from the fire safety community, the first responder community, because we're really trying to protect everybody, right? The first responders, the second responders, the tradespeople, the public. And what does that look like in the real world? It can be extremely complicated, especially as we learn lessons. And so that's where this type of engagement is super relevant. Dwayne and Chris, what do you think?
Absolutely. I was going to add there, Ken, that for many of these topics that cross over between the different councils, we when we do the convening of the councils, we don't always just go in our separate rooms. We do have an opportunity to kind of go into one broad room with all three councils represented there. Sometimes two councils represented, but sometimes all three councils represented there. And we talk about some of these topics that do have overlap across all of the councils. Our council members really enjoy and appreciate the ability to have that cross talk with the other council members on these topics that really cut across the electrical security and fire as well.
Yeah, I would agree. And one topic that's really overarching all of our areas is cybersecurity. And it's really a big unknown right now. So that's going to be a continued effort within all three councils to determine how cybersecurity will impact our councils and the areas at which these councils are responsible for.
Definitely a lot of fascinating work that's going to be going on in the future. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time today. This was really enlightening. I'm sure some of you are going to be back here on the Code Authority podcast again in the future. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And be sure to please keep checking out the Code Authority podcast. How, you might ask? Well, there are lots of ways. First of all, you can go to YouTube, subscribe to the UL Solutions channel, and check out the Code Authority podcast playlist. Of course, look for us on LinkedIn and check out our website, ul.com/the Code Authority. Once again, ul.com/the Code Authority. Thanks a lot. This is the Code Authority. We'll see you back here again later.